Hello and welcome everyone. So glad to have you here on a beautiful fall day here in New York City where I am right now. And I hope it is a beautiful day or afternoon or evening wherever you happen to be in the world. My name is Greg Stevens and I'm very proud to be co-hosting the Designing for Empathy Summit and workshops for the second time. Delighted to work with my colleague and friend Elif Gokcigdem, who I will introduce shortly. Before we get started officially with our program, just a reminder that this program is being recorded, as we will do for all of our workshops and sessions in this year's program. Also, you will have noticed there's closed captioning transcripts below on taking place throughout the program. So that is available to you as well. And as many of us are accustomed to Zoom, the chat box is open for you throughout the program to provide comments, to ask questions, to engage with each other, or to engage with our panelists. Part of my job is to keep this machine running fairly smoothly as we can, but also to keep an eye on the chat box as we go through the program to see what kinds of information or questions you may have. Before we start officially, I do want to offer a couple of land acknowledgements. I am here in New York City, and I acknowledge that the land on which New York City resides is ancestral Lenape homelands. We recognize the long-standing significance of these lands for Lenape nations past and present. And Elif, I know that you are in Washington, D.C., which is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Pataskaway and Anacostan peoples who have served as stewards of the region for generations. So thank you very much for joining us in this program from many cities. And at this moment, I would like to turn our attention and welcome our hostess, the person responsible for the idea and construction of this entire set of workshops and summit, my friend and colleague, Elif Gokcigdem. Elif, thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank Greg and Zorana and all the participants of the summit and the workshops. Really eager to see that we are getting together and this thing is happening now. So it's very exciting. I also would like to especially thank Dr. Zorana Ivcevic from Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence for being such a long-time collaborator and partner in crime as we try to create and find ways to create these perspective shifting experiences in museums. Zorana, would you like to take a moment to say a few words about yourself, and then I'll have brief remarks about what is Designing for Empathy, why are we doing this workshop, and then I'll lead us into the presentation.
Thank you, Elif. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you for working with me on designing new things. We just work so well together, and that's always a joy. I'm a senior research scientist at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and I study creativity as my primary area of work. And through that work, I have met Elif some years ago when she was working on her first book, and the rest is history. We collaborated ever since. That's now 5 years, Elif, and counting. I have started working a few years ago with an art center in Spain in developing educational programs to teach both creativity skills and emotional skills. And that got me really interested in how art can help us learn about ourselves, others, and the world. And that's what Elif and I want to engage with you today.
Thank you, Zorana. Thank you so much. So I guess we can begin now, and I would like to just provide you all with a quick overview of what Designing for Empathy is and why are we doing these workshops. so just because, to prevent me from talking too much, I have my written remarks. So excuse me if I just look down and up, but here we go. So our main goal with the Designing for Empathy workshops and summits is to create a platform where individuals from different backgrounds, disciplines, and sectors can come together to develop solutions to the empathy deficit in our world. We believe that our ability to develop individuals' capacity for empathy towards the oneness of all beings, all of humanity, the environment, and the planet lies at the heart of our ability to solve our most complex problems. The challenges we face today, from social injustice to climate change, are not because we lack the intellectual capacity, technologies, or the resources to tackle them, but it is because caring for others as much as we care for ourselves, which makes us want to take action to solve another's suffering, requires a major perspective shift. This is where we stop seeing ourselves as the centers of the universe and start recognizing that we are all interconnected parts of something much greater than ourselves. This pragmatic perspective shift can only be achieved through a lived experience. And empathy, our ability to imagine the world through another's perspective, provides the foundation. Something extraordinary happens when we empathize. Because of our inherent ability to empathize, our ego, which always puts I, me, myself in the front and center, gets distracted momentarily, while our true self, which is deeply rooted in our heart, in the qualities of compassion and love, takes the helm of our attention and channels it and immerses it in another's perspective. This is not always easy because it requires us to look at the world in a whole new way. Instead of placing ourselves in the center of the universe, we realize that we are, and as a matter of fact, each being in the circle of oneness is unique and an essential component of our existence. This pragmatic perspective shift can only happen through an experience. And that's where Designing for Empathy comes in. We believe that because empathy can be best learned through lived experiences, creating those authentic experiences where individuals can discover, unlock, and advance their potential for empathy in safe and non-judgmental spaces become more essential. Designing for Empathy workshops provide a platform for a diverse group of individuals to come together and experiment with the creation of these perspective-shifting experiences that lead to a spark of empathy on a long journey towards the realization of the oneness of all beings. So empathy is not the end goal, but it's only the beginning of a longer journey. With that, now that I set the bar too high, expectations too high, and all of a sudden we're gonna all realize that we are all one and everything, we are just gonna go back to the beginning and try to experiment with how we can create those little moments of perspective shift. And allow me, as I try to share my screen, just one second. Okay. Okay. So as we begin, we will begin our exploration with the object of Islamic arts, located in the Islamic Arts Gallery of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. Imagine you have just entered into the museum and you're walking through the galleries and you saw the Islamic Arts Gallery, you just walked in and you stopped in front of this object. What comes to your mind? Excuse me. Oops, I think I missed the slide here. Would it be possible to drop the link in the chat because I cannot seem to, as we talk about this, maybe we can also get that going because we have some additional visuals of the object.
Yes,
So I
will
would
do.
like, thank you. I would like to just invite us to talk about, what comes to your mind when I just mentioned to you the phrase Islamic art. Please use the chat function to elaborate. And I cannot seem to see the chat function here, but let's see.
Elif, I can assist. So people
Yes,
are saying geometric, colorful shapes,
thank you.
intricate geometric patterns, geometric, intricate. There's a theme emerging, Persian culture, a particular period in time, calligraphy, geometric designs, more calligraphy, natural forms.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pattern emerging in these responses.
Mm-hmm. So mostly, the shapes and the style of the decorations, intricate, geometric, vegetal, and maybe invoking some places far away. And that's very interesting. And so based on your experience, of your travels, of your knowledge, and our popular culture, can you please describe your first impressions of this object, which we know that is in the Islamic Arts Gallery? Zorana, may I ask? Thank you.
And Greg has dropped a link where you can see the object on your own, on your computer. And that may be helpful because you can then enlarge the picture and look at different pieces of it. It's hard to see it just like this on the screen. So in the chat, you can access it on Google Drive, directly the picture.
And Elif, it looks like some of our colleagues are saying it looks like a drinking vessel, a ceremonial vessel, both functional and decorative, perhaps Byzantine influence. Somebody has noticed a mother and child in the center.
Mm-hmm.
Brenda offers that it perhaps holds special or sacred oil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Would anybody else like to add? Just give it a few seconds. Now we continue our exploration. The label. So if you were in the museum, you would see a label like this, which is actually the actual label from the museum, the bottom part, the text. And I will read it out loud for all of us. This large, impressive canteen, the only known example of its kind from the Islamic world, recalls the shape of ceramic pilgrim flasks. Its inlaid silver decoration combines calligraphy and decorative motifs, such as intricate geometric designs and lively animal scrolls with Christian imagery. These include a representation of the Virgin and Child in the center, surrounded by narrative scenes from the life of Christ, as well as saints and knights. It has been suggested that the canteen may have been commissioned by a wealthy Christian, perhaps as a special memento of his travels. Does reading the label change your impression of the object, your first impression? Does it confirm something that you were already expecting or thinking, or does it challenge something that you were thinking, or challenge an expectation? And I'm happy to go back if you wish. Shall I?
Yes, Elif, why don't you go back to the object
Okay.
slide and this label, and it, Amira says it enhances and explains what I'm seeing. So it opens up more questions. It seems incomplete to me. Paul suggests that it enhances the understanding by describing the individual people involved in the creation of this. Li Dewey says that it confirms the combination of Christian and Islamic traditions, which surprised me. Interesting. And Rasha said, didn't expect to see scenes from the life of Christ.
Yes, it is indeed interesting, right? I mean, even on the label, it just mentions the inclusion of Christian imagery so casually, as if this is something always happens in what we think of in Islamic arts. And also another word that just makes me think a little bit is, I think in the last sentence, it has been suggested that the canteen may have been commissioned by a wealthy Christian, perhaps as a special memento of his travels. Well, if you look at the timing of this object when it was created, mid-13th century, is around the time of the Crusaders. So those traveling Christians, actually, to Arabs on the local people there, they were the Crusaders. And this looks like it's just a special memento of his travels, just like a gift that you get from the Holy Land. But when you think of the context, it can also, as someone said, opens up new questions. And I'll leave the floor to Zorana. And I'm happy to forward Zorana.
Thank you. And it was really wonderful to hear, to read all of your comments in the chat, and please feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in with comments and with questions and with ideas. It opens, several people mentioned that it opens more questions. Could you tell us what questions it opens for you? Sorry, I just felt compelled to say hi.
Oh, hello. I did find it, once I read the label, I found myself very confused because it just, it didn't make any sense to me, the idea of this being a memento or a travel gift. It seemed almost capricious, and it didn't seem to match with what looked like what it might be suggestive of the significance of the object, but also, it just, my questions are just like, well, right, who would have this and what for? And I don't know. I didn't appreciate, in a way, I didn't appreciate the label kind of like throwing out a supposition with no context, and that just made some suggestions that seemed really quite, I don't know. I'm trying to be diplomatic. It seemed like a really unfortunate label. It was not helpful, and it set a bad mental space for me.
Yeah, and that's why we picked it, right? Because it brings surprises, but it doesn't explain anything. They're just hints, but no helpful stuff in there. And you are left with wanting more, but also not knowing what to make of what you have. And when you said what this object is for, the interesting thing, I mean, I always wish when I'm in a museum that I could pick an object and feel it. Of course you can't, but it turns out that this object is pretty heavy. So it looks functional, but it probably isn't functional because its heaviness, it would be prohibitive to for use as actually drinking canteen. So it stays sort of mysterious a little bit. Anybody else who wants to jump in?
Zorana, I wonder if, Angelina, you mentioned that this definitely opens up new ideas. What new ideas does it open up, or what thoughts do you have about what we've just been describing?
Yeah, so I know we've brought up a handful of times talking about the overlapping of Islamic and Christian traditions and how it is presented in the object, and then also kind of looking at how the label presents that, specifically how it was made, and then also the idea of the cultural context, because there's like an allusion at an interpretation with the last sentence, but we don't know what else. Maybe it has to do with like the overall exhibition narrative, where this piece was taken from, or something along the lines of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all important questions, and we are seeing the object in isolation. And we just enter a gallery, and I remember walking for the first time, actually for the first time with Elif, into the Islamic Arts Gallery at the Smithsonian in DC, and it is the space is very much devoid of context, and in the center of the room is one case with a single object enclosed in glass, and that's it. There's little explanation of it, and there's very little context. It feels like a fish out of water, a person out of their environment, very disembodied. And so I hear you, it's just very hard to make meaning of it because there's a lot that we don't understand. I see Michelle with a comment too about whether there is significance in the shape of the object, that there is a central depressed area on the flat side. Elif, do you think there is some significance with the shape of the object?
Apparently, this is a traditional pilgrim's flask shape of that time. But other than that, little is known how exactly this was used, this particular object was used, because of the sheer size and the elaborate decorations that it has on it. It's a very expensive object. And there's much literature about it, regarding the function or the potential functions of this object.
So there's something familiar, right? There is a shape that is familiar shape of a canteen that is similar to many other objects that would have been made at the time for a particular purpose, but this particular object does not have that purpose. So there are these contradictions that seem to be inherent in the object, and we need to know much more to really understand what it is. And in this particular case, and that's part why we picked this object, we actually don't know. There isn't enough information to tell us a full story. It makes us wanting ask more questions. And as Elif was sharing the label, the real label from the museum. I see just a comment popped up. I'm not sure if this is something available, research can answer, but the label made me more curious about the artisan. Yes, so there is a relationship between the artisan and this patron. Is it a patron? Do they have a relationship? Is it just an economic relationship? What is going on here? So we do not know a lot of things about the subject, and the thing that everybody is doing here is asking questions and trying to go with, as a starting point, having this label and little research that there is about the object. And if we try to summarize what we can gather about the object from sort of available data, it seems to be following a particular structure. So because of some properties of this object, people think a certain something, right? That something is your expectation, your interpretation, the initial one, as you try to study the object itself. But then once you start learning about it, even just start learning about it, the little that we have in the label, we see the story that, well, actually it is something different. So if we add the content to this, because this object was created in the Islamic world and we find it in the Islamic arts gallery, people tend to think that it has traditional elements of Islamic art, such as calligraphy, intricate geometric designs, lively animal scrolls, all the things that you have mentioned as first coming to mind when you think Islamic art. But actually, there's just a little bit of those things, but actually they are also figural depictions, and they show Christian imagery, which was quite surprising. There's a representation of Virgin and Child in the center, and I know that in the chat, somebody was mentioning that there is a mother and child, but it just, our mind would not go that it is a Virgin and Child from the Christian imagery. And then it is surrounded by narrative scenes from the life of Christ, as well as saints and knights. And this is the time of the Crusades. So what will be familiar and important to people who were interacting with the object. And when we think about this structure, we interact with an object, and then there is a certain expectation that happens, but there is a different story. It reminds me of personal experiences. It reminds me of things, how it happens in our own lives. And Elif, can you go to the next slide? It reminds me when we, in our own lives, that sometimes we are misjudged or misunderstood, or, well, this kind of story happens in our own lives. And the first story that just came to my mind when we were first exploring objects that we could share for this workshop is, well, potentially a little funny one. We live close to Boston, and in Cambridge, there is a substantial Portuguese community from the Azores. And there's this little tiny Portuguese restaurant. Everybody inside speaks Portuguese, just 5 or 6 tables, tiny, but clearly catering to this community. So it's me and my husband coming in, and we clearly are the only ones not speaking any Portuguese. And we sit, we order food. I ordered whole grilled fish. That's what it says on the menu. And a person who was taking the orders, who I'm pretty sure was the owner, looks at me, and here it is, because I am this little non-Portuguese speaking white woman in New England. He thought that I could not possibly know how to eat fish with bones and heads and eyes that look at you. And he said, you know, that fish has bones. And I said, I know, and trust me, I can handle it. He was not convinced. He was clearly not convinced. And of course, I eat my fish. And at the end, he comes, realizes that the only thing left on the plate is this tiniest pile of indigestible bones, and almost exclaims, oh, you really know how to eat fish. Well, it turns out that I grew up in the Mediterranean, and I grew up on a small island, and I definitely know how to eat the fish, but I look in a certain way. I speak a certain language. I'm not from his community. And so we can get into these traps because I speak English only. in New England, people think, and actually it's a little bit different than that. And I'm wondering whether this thing we have noticed with an object can be applied to understanding ourselves and then our interactions in the world. So I would invite you to think of situations like, not like this, but situations with this kind of structure, something that this can remind you of, where there is a misperception, there's something that ends with but actually. And I would invite you to take 10 minutes, just individually, consider for yourself. We have time, we are not rushed. Take the time, consider it, and then perhaps if there are people who are comfortable, you can share some of your experiences and stories with the rest of us. So we'll take some 10 minutes and just think to yourself, write down something that could come up for you. And please, if you would like to share, if you have thoughts, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
Michelle here.
Michelle.
Hey, I definitely think so. I mean, I feel like we do encounter a lot of objects as well as situations throughout our lives that we, if we don't know the context behind them, that can very easily be misinterpreted or, misunderstood. And so it's interesting to take something like this that's such a decorative, beautiful historical object and realize that we know nothing about it. And I mean, we don't know enough about it to really be able to understand what its significance is and what it was actually, intended to convey. So.
Were you able to think of any personal situations or experiences that might have done this to you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, I mean, language wise, when you're bilingual or multilingual, I think you often find yourself in situations where in context, you are misunderstood or people misunderstand you because they don't realize that you speak the same language as they do. And that could be something as simple as, recent example, I was in San Francisco at a very famous literary cafe called Vesuvio's with some friends, sitting upstairs having a cocktail, and then there was a crowd of a group behind us that were speaking in German, and they were chattering and doing their whole thing, and I could kind of eavesdrop a little bit on their conversation. Their dialect was similar to mine, and they were struggling with trying to, prop up their phone to take a collective picture. And they're like, maybe we should go ask somebody to take a picture for us. And so I just turned around and in German and said, would you like us to take a picture? And then we started up a whole conversation and they were completely shocked. So stuff like that, or, walking into an Arabic grocery store and just asking at the meat counter for what you want in Arabic. And they look at you like, white woman, what are you doing in here? How on earth can you ask for what you want in the language of the establishment? So stuff like that a lot. I find it kind of fun, but it's, it's unexpected and can throw people off.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's definitely fun and you can totally, it becomes a good story. And at times it can be unpleasant because people are misjudging your ability, your contributions, your place in the world. And those are the non-fun parts, right?
Yeah. Or they're saying something that is negative or that and then you just pretend you don't understand and you walk away and get out of that situation. Those are the, unpleasant experiences in that regards. In a way, it's nice to know what they're saying so that you can kind of be aware, but at the same time, you're just like, whoa, okay, I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Anybody else wants to jump in?
I see Safia raising her hand.
Oh, good. Yeah, I
Hi.
see people, so it's very hard to. Sometimes Zoom can still be challenging even after all this time.
Yeah. My name is Safia, and my experience is along the lines of the uncomfortable. So because I have an Arab name, people think I'm Muslim, but I'm actually atheist. And in many aspects of my life, even riding in an Uber, people make assumptions about my religious background, which makes me very uncomfortable to then have to either have a discussion I don't want to have, or be very open and talk about my belief system and possibly open myself up to a lot of negative assumptions and connotations that some people think about atheists.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you, Safia. Yeah, it's people have assumptions and they can be uncomfortable.
I see Angelina raising hand.
Yes, but I know, Elif, you had your hand up as well, so if you would like to share first.
After you, go ahead.
Okay. I know one of the things that, and Sophia, you bring that up as well, for things that aren't always visible, you have a lot of those misconceptions and those judgmental moments that come up. I know a lot of times you see that with disability or sexuality and things along those lines, and it creates that moment of you don't know how people are going to react and challenges misconceptions. And sometimes it can be a really positive learning environment where you get to teach someone something new, but it does come with that vulnerability as well. And that can be painful for some, and it also shouldn't always be put on the person that is being judged in that moment.
Yeah, it can be very difficult for a person who is already having feelings and being put in an uncomfortable position to now have an additional responsibility to teach somebody and engage in a person and engage with people who you don't know how they're going to react. Yeah, thank you, Angelina. I'm trying to scroll if there is other people with their hands raised, but please just feel free to jump in, just unmute yourself.
I think I would like to go next if possible, because I don't have any control of my mouse, so I cannot click unmute or do anything, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So while I'm unmuted, I'm just gonna take this opportunity to share. And this is not a, you know, so basically this is what I wrote. Because I don't cover my hair in a certain way, some people in my country may think that I don't have faith, but actually, I've always practiced faith in my own way.
I think it's so nice. It's such a good structure, because I could come up with many examples just like you, Elif. Maybe I'll share one. Shall I share one or two?
Please.
So because I am tall and strong and present, people think I must be extroverted and a leader. But actually, I like to live on the fringes and in the back of the room. And I had another one. Because I have studied empathy for 20 years, my partner thinks I should be empathic all the time, but actually I'm just as imperfect as anyone else.
Just happen to be human. Yeah, I always found it really fantastic when people think that if you study something, then you have reached perfection in that area. But we do make these assumptions, right? It is part of being human, but it is also part that we would like to invite you to do as we started thinking of the object, is to ask questions. These assumptions are going to happen, and sometimes museums are not necessarily helpful where they could be more helpful, like Traveler, or just drop something without telling us, ooh, wait a second, how did this imagery come in here? Without context and without really giving us the real information. But what we can do is ask questions and realize we are not going to always be right and not always succeed. But that process of asking questions is going to be necessary for starting to get to some kind of understanding. I am a personality psychologist by training, and by personality, my own personality, I like to get obsessed with things and I fall in love with things. And my favorite title of all times in my field is, what do we know when we know a person? And I think it's poetic, it's beautiful, and it's an invitation, and it's Certainly psychologists have ideas what you need to know a person, and this one who actually wrote that title has very specific ideas. But it is also an invitation to be open and to ask questions and to explore more. And that's at the core of empathy. When we encountered an object today, we got little bits and pieces, and those were not satisfactory. When we interact with the world, other people get bits and pieces and don't necessarily get a lot about us and make assumptions. And sometimes they are comical, like with my eating fish, but sometimes they are unpleasant. Like making assumptions about your religion, which is, or no religion. Those are uncomfortable things that put you in difficult situations. Or making assumptions that you are extroverted and then react in a certain way towards you and expect certain things from you. But this is also important as we think of what does this teach us in relation to empathy? What does this teach us in how we interact, not just with objects, but objects can be a source of inspiration. If we can ask all these questions about an object, well, we could certainly ask all questions about humans we come in contact with. We are never going to get rid of all of our assumptions. We are never going to completely stop making them, because then we wouldn't be human. But we can correct for them or do our best to correct for them. Elif, are you?
Yes, and now I cannot seem to share. Let's see. Can you advance the?
I cannot advance it because it's showing from your computer.
It's really strange. I don't know why. I have no use of my, and I'm afraid that if I do something, I'm gonna get kicked out.
Would you like to stop sharing if you're having computer problems and I can continue sharing?
Yes, maybe if I can.
So sorry everyone.
Now it seems like now sorry about the trouble. Okay, so here we go. I think just to wrap things up a little bit, and thank you all also for all your sharings. I would like us to take a moment to go a little bit deeper into articulating what just happened and what are some of those qualities that we have all experienced might have contributed to this collective experience that we had of, getting proximate to this object, maybe being posed with a dilemma and then having to react to it, and then individual reflection, and then sharing, which, some sharings could be and were, I think, quite personal. What are some of those qualities that might have incorporated, that might have aided for this collective experience to occur? And I have started this list, and it's just a conversation starter. But I introduced these ingredients of what I call the alchemy of empathy. And these are things like proximity, or getting proximate to something, to the other. It could be an object, it could be a human being, it could be the environment or the planet itself. It could be our need for context or actually information about that other. Contemplation, vulnerability, understanding, and collective sharing. And this is, as I said, this is just a conversation starter, but I do believe that in addition to what empathy is and how that happens, if we also pay attention to these qualities of the space, and what took place, can help us intentionally design for those elements in the experiences that we are creating for others. And these will look different in every context. Every museum, every project will look different. And the list that I've started in my book called Designing for Empathy, there are, I believe, 13 of such ingredients, including breaking bread, storytelling, awe and wonder, play, curiosity. Humor is certainly one of them. Is that these are the things that we often take for granted. We know that when we are exposed to them, they help shed our barriers. They help sort of shatter our barriers one by one. Such as humor, like when we laugh all together with at the same thing, or as a collective experience, something happens to us that we are not afraid of letting go, and that's also vulnerability. But if we can be more articulate and intentional about these qualities, I think they might help us design those empathy building experiences. And I often in my presentations leave a few drops open and available to anyone who are willing to share their what they might have experienced. If you have any suggestions based on what we experienced together, please do share. And thankfully I can see the chat now. So I would love to hear your thoughts, what you think about this concept, this approach to empathy building, and if you might recommend or suggest, other ingredients of alchemy of empathy. Now that I think of, maybe storytelling is a part of this, because we did tell stories about ourselves.
And we can also tell stories beyond ourselves. We can tell, today we started with an object, we went into stories about ourselves, but then we can apply this same kind of thinking and process in trying to understand others. When we are interacting with others who are familiar, when we are interacting with others who are less familiar, when we are interacting with others who are very unfamiliar to us and very different from us. And each of these can be a somewhat different process. So when we interact with somebody new at work, we might already have some things in common with them. And I can have some assumptions that are based in previous experience, that somebody who is a new postdoc or new faculty member at work has some interests that we share, and some experiences, educational experiences that we share. We can sometimes go too far in making these assumptions, but we have some place to start. But then if you are meeting somebody outside of our social groups, somebody who is from a different background than we are, I'm trying to think people who are most different in ways that would be most different to me. And I think sometimes people think of, most different people are people who are coming from a different culture far away. These days, we are talking a lot about Afghan refugees. So they might be first people that readily come to mind as somebody who we want to learn more about or empathize with. For me personally, it is not really difficult to empathize with them. I can ask questions, I can imagine where they're coming from, but there are other people who I have very difficult time imagine what we could have in common, or imagine their point of view, or finding wanting to even engage with them. For me personally, it is people from the far right who I have have hard time even wanting to engage, making myself engage in any way. So we all have maybe different people who have challenged us, or different people from different groups or from different backgrounds, where we could ask ourselves to ask more questions.
And oh my gosh, again, okay. And with that, Zorana loves to pose this question, and I think it is very important, right? What do we need to know the other? So there's a lot of questions, and we have many assumptions. The other remains complex, multifaceted, a mixture of familiar and unfamiliar, and leaves us often with many unknowns and assumptions. But I think that this framework perhaps can be useful to all of us as we go in our daily lives to imagine how this framework is also true for another, even those we are having a hard time engaging with. So we looked at the object, we looked at an object through this lens, lens of this framework. We looked at ourselves through this lens, and how much more does this apply to encounters with the other? And this is the question we would like to leave you with. And we would actually appreciate it if you can share with us if you found this approach, this framework useful, and using an object to arrive at this point. How did you feel about that? And also, of course, we do have a very short survey, only 4 questions, which we will drop in the chat momentarily. I would appreciate it if you can take the time to fill it out in the last few minutes of our conversation. Anybody jump in? Yeah.
Elif, as I was reading your question about what do I need to know the other, I think my immediate response as a yoga and mindfulness practitioner was that what I need to know is that I don't know it all. So just, dropping that assumption would be so powerful in looking at things with a fresh perspective and without filters of the prior knowledge that one might have.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I see Paul just dropped in a comment responding to Michelle. I connected it as well. I work at the Seattle Aquarium, so I'm thinking of this framing when it comes to animals like barnacles and sea anemones. Many people don't see them as alive, so storytelling can enhance perspective taking. That's very true. And as a matter of fact, we do have a design challenge just on this very subject, how to foster empathy towards wildlife, the Seattle Aquarium workshop. And you should have it on the agenda. I don't recall the exact date, but it is one of the scheduled workshops. So I hope you'll join us all and share your perspectives. And Aisha says, staying curious, cultivating a sense of awe and the beautiful of all creation, objects, human beings, and the nature of our world. Curiosity is definitely is another ingredient.
It looks like you're going to add a new drop in the
Yes.
in the
Yes,
bottle.
yes, it's a work in progress, basically. You know, we can just have as many drops as we can. As a matter of fact, now I think that, you know, these ingredients of empathy and what makes empathy is not a transactional. I mean, it is not a sort of a clinical event. You know, it is not a sterile thing that just happens in our brains. It has many things contribute to it. Many things affected, including our own physiology, how our brain is made up, how our, you know, our personality traits and all that. And these ingredients are not like pieces of a puzzle. They don't even have sharp edges and corners that connect. They are sort of interbeings. They exist within each other. Curiosity might lead to dialogue and listening might lead to vulnerability. Vulnerability might lead to sharing and reflection. So and again, I think, you know, if we pay attention to them, we can maybe better articulate and hopefully also conduct some research on these ideas, whether they hold or not, so that we can better design our experiences. Yes, Michelle mentions that the Seattle Aquarium's book, Catastrophe, the Cat, is just, it's an illustrated book. It is just so beautiful and an amazing story. It is just about, you know, how we can actually, if we take the time and become curious and get proximate to those who are very different from us, we might end up empathizing with them. Yes, and you can definitely get that copy of that beautiful illustrated book from Seattle Aquarium. Thanks for sharing. So with that, I think anybody has any questions or any comments? I know that we are scheduled till 2:30, but we don't need to take the whole time.
Elif, thank you so much, and Zorana, thank you. As you both have been talking and sharing this afternoon, I'm thinking of some of the work I do with my students in the graduate program in museum professions at Seton Hall University. And we talk frequently about the many layers of stories that an object can tell. So your object lesson that you shared with us earlier, on one level, it's quite simply, what is this thing? What is it made of? Who made it? When was it made? And then on another layer, what is the decoration, or what is the story that is being told here? And you illustrated the complexity of story that seemed to surprise a lot of people in our audience today. I hadn't thought that there would be a virgin and child on this Islamic piece. Then the other layer of story that we see often in exhibition labels that have a particular, maybe sometimes singular perspective. So I think about all of those things, and then we move beyond the object itself to the meaning making, what it represents in our society. And so in my program in museum professions, we talk a lot about any object has so many stories to tell that could actually bring us to a broader understanding of the people we share the planet with. Angelina, I don't know if you're still in the audience. Angelina is one of my lovely students in the Museum Professions program, and we are currently engaged in an exhibition project at the Morris Museum in Morristown, New Jersey, looking at historic collections and reinterpreting them through a contemporary lens, which means we have to tell a different story about these objects. Angelina, would you mind sharing a moment or two about what you're exploring?
Yeah, I can bring it up. So I'm doing an analysis on for For those who don't know, the Morris Museum has a collection of music boxes and automata. So I'm specifically looking at one of the music boxes, which is a barrel organ with animated figures from the 1820s to the 1840s. It's a German piece, and I'm looking at the figures and how their cultural representations. And I've kind of reformatted my essential question recently. So Professor Stevens, this will be the first time you are hearing this question, but of how are you represented within the Guinness collection? And looking at, because the piece I've categorized it in 3 ways, looking at Europe, looking at Africa, and then looking at Asia. And having the visitor reflect on, what are you seeing in the collection? Because the music box and automata industry was centered in France and Germany, and how and was for a upper class audience. So how that reflects through just the depictions of these little figures on one music box.
So another really interesting example, not unlike the example Zorana and Elif that you shared. You know, how are these figures represented? What do they represent in their time? And then what do we make of them now as we think about understanding other and cultural representation? Thanks, Angelina.
And on that note, we would like to end for today. Thank you, Angelina, for sharing your work. That is really wonderful. And thank you all for being here. It was good to hear from you. There were some questions about the link. We will
About
have
the survey. Yeah, I think we will just send you an email, and hopefully you'll be able to see it on the body of the email and just respond to that. I don't know why it is not working. I opened it, available to everyone, but it seems like it is not letting everyone to go in and.
But Elif, if you go to the 3 little dots on the top right corner, everyone can do that, and then click on preview, then you do get the front side of the questionnaire, and I think you can just answer and submit there.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's an eye icon. Okay. Thank you so much for going through the trouble to do that.
Well, thank you all very much, and especially Zorana and Elif, thank you for a very thought-provoking and engaging workshop. As many of you know, this is the second of our workshops in the 2001 Designing for Empathy Summit and Workshop program. We will continue tomorrow and I think nearly every day for the rest of the week and into next week. So you will have gotten at least one email, if not many emails from me, asking you to please sign up for workshops, primarily so that we have a sense of who might be in attendance. And we definitely appreciate you taking that extra moment, but we especially appreciate you being here today and sharing with us. And hopefully you got some good things to take away from this program today. With that said, I'm going to end the recording and say farewell to all of you and hope you have a lovely afternoon or evening.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next